Hey guys, this is just one guy, and this is my tutorial series, Unity Tips and Tricks. Now in this tutorial we're going to go over creating a basic nav mesh. This isn't going to go too far into the nav mesh because that would take a couple of videos to explain, so this will be just part one where we just go over the nav mesh. Okay. Now I decided to go over the nav mesh because I'm writing the AI script, which I'll post in the next video. But first, in order to understand some of the things in the AI script, you have to understand some of the things in the nav mesh. And you can see that we have an enemy right here. He's using Unity's nav mesh system and he's moving around. And the pros of a nav mesh system is that the enemies can move around intelligently. You can see that when he's chasing me, he's actually going to turn his corner. You see? And if he were to climb up here, he could jump down and a bunch of other stuff. That's just nice. Now let's take a look at how this works. Now first, if we go to navigation, you can see this blue stuff covering the area, and that's the nav mesh. And what that does is it tells you where the NPC is allowed to walk, and the area without it is the NPC. Where the NPC isn't allowed to walk. Now you might also notice these blue lines, and what that means is the enemy can traverse this distance. Now I believe it'll tell you which direction too. Like this will go up if the enemy is able to jump up it, or go down when it's able to go down. And these are controlled by the in a bake tab by the not the event settings, sorry, the off mesh generation, which I've set and I'm about to go over now. Now the thing about the nav mesh, it's great for moving around in AI and it can move around intelligently. The only bad thing about it is they can't avoid other Nav Mesh agents. So you can get AI that can run into each other. Now I don't know if they fixed that in Unity 5, but Unity 4 you couldn't get them to recognize each other. But for everything else, it's extremely good. Oh, and another problem is you can't move this once you put it in place. It's not really a problem because they created a workaround, which I'll go over in later tutorials. But once you put this nav mesh in place, you can't move it at runtime because the nav mesh won't move, and you can't rebake the nav mesh at runtime. Now let's go over some of the settings in the bake tab. Wait, before we go over that, show you how to set it up first. Now first, all the ground and everything that you want to put in the nav mesh, you have to go over here and click this static tab. Now this static tab does a bunch of different things, but the only thing we're interested in right now is just the navigation static. But all this other stuff will be static too. You can uncheck it if you want, but for right now we're just interested in navigation static, and that's what it has to be. And what it basically does is tells Unity that you're not going to move the object, that it's going to stay still during runtime. And so after you hit static on everything that you want to be bake into the mesh, you go over here, and right now you can just hit bake and that'll be good enough right now just to get you started. But I'm gonna just go over some of these settings just so you know what they do. Now the agent radius, it's just how small can a space be when the agent still goes through it before it gets stuck and just has to go around and take a different path. The agent height is like if they were going under a bridge, how low can a bridge be before the agent gets stuck. It's like how tells you how low of a bridge that agent could go under. And I know I'm saying agent a lot of times, but what I mean is NPC. That's what Unity refers to their NPCs as, agents. And then we have the max slope. Now what the max slope is how high of a hill an NPC can go up before it gets stuck, and like basically has to take another route. And I think by default it's set at a 45-degree angle. I really wouldn't change that, but if you wanted to carry the NPC to climb steep hills or potentially climb or something like that, you would need to change that. And then we have the step height, and this steps, how high can a step be before an NPC can't climb it anymore. Then we have the off-link mesh generation, and that's responsible for these lines right here. First we have the drop distance. Like as you can see, I have the nav mesh built up here too, and if the NPC were up here, he would need to get from here to here, but he can't go down the side of the wall because there's no nav mesh. So this is where the drop settings come in, and what he'll do is he'll jump this height, and this tell you how far enemy NPC can drop. Like if I were to set it to 1, and bake it, you would notice that the lines go away. And what that means is he can no longer jump from that height. If he were up here, he would be stuck up here and there'd be no way he could get down. And then we have the jump distance. And if I had two of these, one right here, and I want the NPC to jump from this one to this one, that would control that. And this controls how far you can jump. Now I only have one, so I can't demonstrate it right now, but that's what that controls. And then we have the advanced settings. Now they changed the advanced settings in Unity 5 from Unity 4. Only thing I could remember was what the height match does and the minimum region area. And basically what it does was make the nav mesh more accurate. Like if you were creating a nav mesh over a large terrain and you had like rolling hills or something like that, and you wanted it really accurate, you go mess with these settings down here. And that's what that controls, but it takes a longer time to bake. Now we have the bake right here. This basically creates the nav mesh and that's it. And then we have clear, and that clears the nav mesh. And in Unity 5, they're giving you a nice example right here of how everything is going to work out, just so it's more visual, as you can see. Before they didn't have none of that, you just had to guess. Now let's go to the next important step, the Nav Mesh Agent. Now it's important to note that this Nav Mesh is very versatile and can do a lot of things. But I'll have to go over some of the other functions because it's really useful. Like if I wanted to create a platform and have the nav mesh appear dynamically, there's a way to do that too. But I'll have to go over that in other tutorials because this is just going to be part 1. It's going to be a part 2 and a part 3. Okay, let's find the enemy. Let's click on him. Now in the enemy, we have the Unity component that's a companion to the navigation mesh, which is the Nav Mesh Agent. Now this right here isn't a collider. It's a representation of the size of the agent to the nav mesh. This is how the nav mesh sees the agent. It's important to note that because you still need a collider. Now while the agent won't fall through the floor because he has a nav mesh on, even though even if he doesn't have a collider, he won't fall through the floor. But your characters will be able to walk through him. If we were to shoot him, there would be nothing to recognize the shot. So it's just important to note this isn't a collider. It's a representation. Now this controls the radius of how big the nav mesh sees the agent. And then you have this controls the height of how high it sees it. Basically how high it controls the nav mesh agent. And then you have the base offset. Now the base offset just controls the bottom, how much it's offset by. And what I basically use this for, I don't know if it's what they designed it for or anything, but if like see him right here, he has his feet and I want to make sure they're touching the ground. So sometimes you might lift it up a little bit so his feet can actually touch the ground and look a little more realistic. And then we have the steering, the basic controls to control the speed of stuff. The speed is obvious, it controls how fast the nav mesh go. Well, that's kind of inaccurate. It controls the maximum speed which the nav mesh can hit. And this controls the turning speed basically when he rounds a corner or something like that. The acceleration is kind of tricky. Now the acceleration, what it's supposed to control is how fast the enemy speeds up. But it gets a little tricky because okay, how to explain this. This nav mesh isn't only designed for characters. It's designed to add a little more realism in the game. And the acceleration, what it'll do is you tell a navigation to go to a vector. You tell the agent to go to a vector 3. Now say I wanted him to go right here, and I set the acceleration really high. He wouldn't just go right here. He would go right here, and then he would slide. Now in a first-person shooter, that's bad, but if it was a card game, that would be realistic. If I sped up to 60 miles per hour and then tried to stop right here, I wouldn't. The car would slide a little bit and go like that. And that's what the acceleration does. It kind of, that's where it comes in important to me. But some people want it like that, some people don't. But in a first-person shooter, you definitely wouldn't want it like that. So what I've done is, in my personal games, when I code this when the agent gets towards his destination, I just drop it to 0. That way the agent just stops on a dime. Now that's what auto braking is supposed to be for, but it's never worked for me, so I've just never been able to trust it. The agent always slid past the point. But that's what the auto braking is for, just to stop the agent as soon as he gets to his destination. And then we have the stopping distance. This controls how far the agent, how close the agent gets to its destination. Like if I were to set it right here and I would have set the stop distance to 2, the agent would go right here. He would stop right before he get to the distance. And this is important if you're making like an RPG or a first-person shooter and you set the target to be the player. You wouldn't want the agent to actually go to the player. You want him to go in front of the player. So you would set the stopping distance for like 2 or 3 or something like that. Usually 2 is a good indicator. And then we have the obstacle avoidance, and this controls basically how much how fast the avoidance acts. And I never had to change this. I just always kept it at high, and it's never really been a problem for me because in general the nav mesh is pretty accurate. Only time I can see this really being a problem if you had a car game where the nav mesh was moving extremely fast and it needed to avoid things. But it is important to note that the higher you turn it up, the more memory it uses. And then we have the pathfinding. Now I've never had to change any of these settings, but the only one I can remember really what it does is the auto repath. And what this is say you have an agent and you tell him to go to this destination right here, but then the target moves, so you say no, when he's at right here you tell him nope, just go over here, and that's what auto repathing allows him to do. Otherwise he'd go to that point and then go to this point like you told him, but instead he just changes the path midway. But that's the only one I can remember what it does. I never had to change any of these. I usually just leave them the same. And it's important to go over a little bit of the coding. Just move this. Find it. Now I've set this up in a chase function because I wanted to chase people. But if you wanted to go to an object, you would set it different. Now the important thing to note here is brain.legs. This is basically representing a Nav Mesh agent. I've just called it brain.legs for just to save time, because that's the way it's set up in my AI script. But for general purposes, it's just Nav Mesh Agent. That's what it's called. In fact, I'll even show you over here, just so we can be even more simple. Say legs Nav Mesh Agent, and then in the start method, I've got it getting the component Nav Mesh Agent. But the important thing to note is the function set destination, and that's how you tell the Nav Mesh Agent where to go. And it takes a vector 3. So if you were to use a transform, you use transform position. Now I've set this up in a chase function where I've set it up to take a transform, and then the transform it gets the vector 3 of the transform and gives it to the set destination. But this is how I've set it up and how I recommend setting it up, with a little bit of difference if you're animating a character. The stopping distance, I have it as the minimum distance, then the move speed, the acceleration, and then the speed into the move speed, and then set destination. I just wanted to go over set destination because that's how you tell the Nav Mesh where to go. And again, the acceleration, this will become a problem during animation. And what I do is when a target gets to within its distance, I just say drop that acceleration to 0, and then it usually stops.
And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to suggest a tutorial, please suggest a tutorial in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.